are helping to write advanced curriculum for Northeastern Institute of Cannabis Technology Solventless extractions. I'm pulling all my panelists up here. We're going to teach you guys a little bit about solventless concentrates, my favorite method of smoking. I'm an asthmatic. It's basically saved my life. It's also taken me off of a lot of pills, and I'm sure many people here can relate to that. So let's get this discussion going.
Hi, my name is Ellen Brown, and I work at Sensenia Seminars. I also work over at the Northeastern Institute of Cannabis. I love that we're having a panel today about solventless medicine because it's a form of medicine that we can look into for helping our patients and furthering the movement.
Yeah, hi, my name's Kyle Corrao. I wash bubble hash and I crush rosin on a large rosin press. I live in Northern California, but I'm from here.
How's it going? I'm Addison DeMoura. I'm one of the co-founders of Steve Hill Laboratory, which is the first cannabis analysis laboratory in the country. I've been with Steve Hill since 2007, and then just last year left the company to start a new investment consulting firm to be able to bring concentrate companies and other businesses like that forward in California. I live in California, but I'm from Massachusetts. So.
I'm Mila from Moderator company in Amsterdam, and we make the apparatus you need to make non-solvent hash. So we have dry system sieves, we have with bags, brushing machines. That's my part in this.
Hi, I'm Eric from Mass Cannabis. I'm a local from Worcester. My friends and I have one of our awards for non-solvents and other stuff. They got some mass genetics and stuff. Sorry. I'm also the owner of Tribulations, a seed company based out of Barcelona. And so happy to be up here with all these people. These guys are so great.
All right, we're going to start this discussion off with talking about the equipment that you guys use and need to make the proper concentrates with solid methods, whether it's dry sift or bubble hash. Kyle, you want to talk a little bit about micron bags and how they are supposed to be displaced through sizes and etc.?
Sure, depending on the method that you're using, if you're using a machine, then you're using a sealed 220 bag inside of your machine, but if you're just using large bubble bags and trash barrels like I like to do, using 220 and then a food bag and then a catch bag at the bottom. Depending on how high grade your material is, really it's how many food bags you want to use and how wide your microns want to be. They go down 220, 190, 160, 120, 90, 73, and then you got all your garbage down to your 25 bag.
Can you explain to them by garbage what do you mean, and what are your most desirable bags? What are you looking for out of that selection of bags the most?
And just like Mila will say, it's between 90 and 73. Some people pull a rad 90, some people pull a rad 73, and depending on the food bags you use above it is what you're going to catch with it. I don't like the 25 because you get a lot of like dead bugs and sediments and stuff in there. Depending on the grade of trim that you're running, I mean, I see a lot of food grade trim. You know, I'll run a lot of garbage trim for edibles. You know, I feel that, it's a lot of dead bugs and stuff in the 25. Although recently a guy called Max Drycomb showed me a 25 that looked like as good as any 73 I ever had. Yeah, strain dependent, material dependent.
I always think the main thing to make a good hash is, of course, the genetics, because you're never going to get better than what you put in. But I agree with the 70 and 90 micron bags. For me, that gives the best. Because also with the big crystals, if you draw it out, each crystal has a thin layer of cellulose around it. So if you have masses of little crystals, the percentage of cellulose is much higher. And there's only a tiny bit of oil in those little crystals, even if you catch them. So big crystals is good. And genetics will determine the size of the crystals and also whether it was an outdoor or an indoor. So what we sell most is the 220, the 120 just to clean it up a bit, the 70, and the 38, the 90,
All right, so if any of you are confused by a micron bag, It's a bag that has a pour screen at the bottom, so when you pull it up, it collects all the resin that you have, but lets all the water drain out. So it's basically a filtration system. Every bag has a different micron size. With that being said, and all this talk about strains, I wanted to go into a little bit of a discussion about the material that you want to use when it comes to making solventless extractions, specifically foam melt bubble hash. You want to elaborate a little bit, Kyle, Eric, on what types of material you use when it comes to dry sift and bubble? Eric, let's start you off.
Yeah, when I make my dry sift, it's usually we trim up. We trim up all our flour over trim bins and everything, and these are the micron bags which we were talking about, the 17, 90. Yeah, so we trim up over trim bins. We take the dry sift that's underneath those screens, and yeah, so we after we're done trimming, I usually take all my trim, I throw it in the freezer for a couple hours, and freezing it up. Then I take it out, I bounce the hell out of it. Or they have these things called tumblers. It's a big tote, has a tumbler inside it with one of these bags that are in a wheel. I put it in there for about 2 minutes. A pollinator, yes, we call them pollinators, the hash queen. And 2 minutes in there, take it out, scrape all your dry sift up, and then what we do now is make it into rosin. So I take it, I wrap it in a 220 screen, one of these pretty much, I cut it up into a little tea bag, put it in my press at about 230 for about 15 seconds, and you golden. Comes out, you got fire, you know, even comes with that, nice and easy. Thank you.
I guess what we're saying here is there's a big difference between a dry sift and a bubble hash. What he's doing is a completely dry separation process. What we're doing, we're taking H2O and ice and we're mechanically separating in a washing machine and extracting our resin instead of separating with like a shake or a couple bundles, you know, where you're actually washing for 5 minutes or so in a washing machine. And I'm gonna go into that right now with Kyle and have him talk a little bit about what types of material he prefers when it comes to making solventless extractions, whether it's fresh frozen material or dry.
Well, just like anything else, it's gold in, gold out. And like Eric over here is running the best material in the country, winning awards all over the place. I mean, he's going to have the best material, like for sure, Mass Genetics. And, I mean, if fresh frozen is rad, but your yield is a lot lower with bubble running it through bags, and you're also catching heads at a lot higher of a food bag. Running it dry, you'll get a much larger yield, and you'll be able to wash it much more. Like once fresh frozen material thaws out, you know, you start getting chlorophyll in your food bags.
Mila, do you have any tips for terpene preservation when it comes to making ice water extractions?
It's definitely true that with the dry sift, you're going to keep all the terpenes, and as soon as you throw it in water, you're going to lose some. So my advice is, just keep it in the water as short as you can. Don't let those bags sit in the water. Something else is that when you add ice to the water, it's very important to get the temperature down to about 40 Fahrenheit because at that temperature, the crystals will get hard like glass. So they will just tumble down. If the temperature is much higher, they will be sticky and they will just stick back on your leaf and you will hardly have anything falling down. That's one thing. Also, I don't like many of the trimmers because many of the trimmers use oil and then you're never going to get a root hash. The best hash to make if you want to make it from trim is to trim by hand.
So basically, with both of these processes, dry sift and foam melt, you're looking for the best starting material you can possibly obtain. And with that, you may end up seeing some really good results. With that being said, I wanted to go into a little bit of a discussion about some tips and technique we have about solventless extractions. Right here, we have some of the most prestigious, award-winning, well-known extractors probably in the country and in the world, like I said. So I want to let you guys elaborate a little bit about that, please. Who would like to start? Kyle?
Know where your material comes from is so important, making sure that you can trace back that source. making sure that it's organic, making sure that it's the strain that people say it is, because when you take down that concentrate, you're working with those terpenes, those flavonoids, those cannabinoids, and those are going to go to patients. So you want to make sure the medicine you have is made organically, it's cured properly, and that it doesn't have any molds or pesticides in it, because who is getting that end product at the end of the day? So accountability for your medicine is huge, especially when it comes to extractions.
There's a couple little tips and tricks and whatnot that, I mean, I've washed a lot of lower grade trim in my time for food grade and stuff, and you can pre-wash your trim with water without ice before you run it. If you don't feel like doing that, you can just, when the bucket is just about empty, all the dirt will sink to the bottom, you just dump that out. I agree about the trim machines. I mean, I've seen a lot of trim machine trim in my couple of years out there that it's just horrible, horrible, horrible for extract.
Yeah, I think that one of the main things too around water hash is storage. What people don't realize is that the trim material or the plant material is food for mold. And if it's not properly stored and there's too much moisture, you can make the greatest hash ever. And that night that you made it, you might take a couple dabs and you're like, oh, it's a little moist, it's okay. If that isn't allowed to dry correctly, by the next morning, mold will already be there very aggressively. And even when you see sometimes that some companies will make a dry hash and then they'll get packaged and sealed in containers. Sometimes at the dispensary level, when patients are getting it, it has mold on it. So one of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of water hashes or things like that is because with the laboratories, Steve Hill has laboratories in 8 states. So we're able to gather a lot of data on different types of molds that are seen in the cannabis community. But then there's moisture levels in different states. You know, Washington's much wetter, so you're going to have higher levels of mold there. But when you take all that data and you look at it, the amount of water hash that has mold in comparison to BHO, it's insane the amount of numbers. BHO doesn't have mold on it. At Steve Hill for the time before I left, I looked over all the data for all the solventless and all the solvent hash, all the BHO hash, and a lot of the statistics come around it. And there was never one single time that there was a BHO sample that ever had any type of mold on it. And that's because it can't survive the process. It's not going to be there. And if it's done properly and it looks good, there's never going to be enough plant matter that's food for mold to live on or exist with. So you're protected. And then typically, those concentrates that you have high levels of terpenes. Those terpenes work as an antifungal, so they can't form on there on top of it. So it's the safest in terms of making sure there's no mold. And mold, if you're an immune deficient patient, you don't want to really be messing with waterless hashes very much because that type of mold can be a detriment, especially when you're combusting it or smoking it. So what my point was is when you're making these water hashes or any of this stuff, make sure that your material's either dry or make sure after you've made it, you've stored it in the correct way. You know, you can take wet material and put it into a cryo and it's going to hold everything dormant. So if you're storing your material, all of your close trim or whatever, even if it's live, you can just throw that into cryos with the right level of micron on your bag, or sorry, I think it is a micron level for how thick the bags are. We use large silicone containers to store stuff inside of the cryo machines. But if you have those, you can store material in there and that'll protect it. But if you're holding onto your own stuff, if you're storing it kind of in the back room or anything like that, sometimes you'll run into, and you won't see that there's mold there. You can typically smell mold before you see it. So storage is really important too, especially for post product and once you've made it, once after you've done making it and you're storing away your hash, you want to make sure that you're storing it correctly, because otherwise everything can go wrong really fast if you're not.
I think I already said most of everything. To dry it when it comes out of the bags, we put it through a strainer and rub it through so that it's separated, and then you can just lay it out on a white sheet of paper and it'll dry very well. Keep it there for 24 hours longer if you think it's already dry. By the way, the washing machine was invented to clean dirty socks. So for a washing machine with the right temperature of water, it's so easy to take off all those crystals. It saves a lot of work.
The best thing I could say for making non-solvent hash is know your grower. Make sure that they have, proper humidity controls and everything, that they're not promoting mold in there and everything. And like everybody else is just saying, you know, just keep it clean through the whole process. It's like, it's medicine. Wear gloves, you know, just keep it clean.
Alright, that brings us to the final phase discussion of the solventless extractions. What Mila was explaining is our terminology called sieving or microplaning. That word molds, microbials, is very scary. If you end up sieving or microplaning, it's really going to help you guys prevent that mold. With that surface area, with the parchment paper, if you sieve through a sieve or like a cheese grater kind of, you're going to be able to spread those trichrome heads out all over that piece of parchment, and that's going to add surface area for those resin heads to dry properly. The problem everybody's having is they're adding all those trichrome heads together too soon, and they're trapping moisture in between those glands and closing them in a jar, which is often causing an auto butter effect, which really isn't what you want. If you have a real 6-star grade hash, it's going to be nice, translucent, gooey. Sometimes not. It may end up looking like crystals, which is also very, very good. With that being said, I wanted to go into a little bit of a talk about rosin tech. This has absolutely taken the nation and the world by storm over the last year and a half, myself including. I love rosin. I smoke it every day. I've been starting to make it myself. A couple people on this panel I consider to be experts in the field right now. I wanted to bring a little bit of a discussion first about your starting material you want to use for rosin and different types of starting material you can use. Flour, bubble, and dry sift. What do you guys prefer?
So I just started actually getting into the rosin pressing. I usually just made my bubble hash and I was happy with that. And then I started to press my medicine even further, or just do flour. You can just press flour, it's amazing. And then you take all those trichomes off and you can just add that medicine right there.
I run a 10-ton bake, modified 10-ton bake press made by a guy named Billy Wood in Ashland, Oregon. It's a rosin presser. I prefer to crush bubble hash on the smaller plate. The platens that I use are about 1.5 by 1.5. Low temperature, high pressure. Like the higher pressure you can use on whatever situation you have going for your rosin, the better. It just means you can use a lower temperature. There's people now cold pressing, 150 degrees, under 150 degrees. With rad material like that, you make something that's almost white. If you run a bubble hash with a disgusting flour like this, and then rosin it like through a thick micron, a high pressure and a low temperature, really almost no temperature. The better the material is, the less heat you even need to extract the plant material out of the extract the resins out of the plant material. And it all comes. I mean, you can run dry sift, what comes out of a tumbler, but like outdoor tends to be a lot dirtier, so like a pollinator, right? So like outdoor will tend to be a lot dirtier, so if you do that, then you'll have a darker rosin. And the darker rosins, I mean, they can still be flavorful, but they're not really marketable. Yeah, particulates and all that garbage. But mostly the low temperature butter with fine bubble hash comes out like looking like BHO wax. And I've never had any bubble or anything like that test for molds or microbials or anything like that. But with the real serious testing now for the competitions, like getting down to the real small levels of it, finding pieces of parchment, hexane from or rubbing alcohol from cleaning, like all kinds of stuff in competitions all over the place. Serious names are absolutely getting popped for microbials and stuff with bubble. It's improper drying, swag materials, stuff like Eagle 20 that's used for powder mold out west. With that, I'll pass it. I love my rosin. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, a couple things. I think that the main thing when it comes to hash, they categorize dry sift hash by stars. The higher the stars, it means that it's gonna bubble. If you put heat close to it, it starts to bubble up. And the other thing is, it can only do that if there's no plant matter. So the best thing I think to make rosin out of, the only rosin that I like, Nate makes, and it's made from dry sift, and he does it in a hand press. So it's not a lot of heat at all, and there's dry sift's not going to have any type of particulate whatsoever in it. The higher grade material that you're using, which means Nuggz run material, that's going to turn out to be less oxidation. The fresher, newer Nuggz run that you have, people don't realize it, but that gold color that you see in a concentrate is called phytol, and that's a terpene. that terpene's only there when chlorophyll's completely gone. So that's where the battle kind of is won in terms of like the math end of when you're making concentrates. If it's got that golden color, you know it has a high level of phytol, and phytol means that there's nothing green in it at all, which is the safest way to do it. It's going to give you more flavor, more taste. So for me, it's lower temps always, and the higher grade material, which is usually dry sift, and you know, at least a half-gram dab, I think, to properly taste good dry sift the right way and cap it correctly, and don't cough at all. And then you get beamed up to another ship at that point. Then you're jamming right, as far as I'm concerned.
And Eric, we're talking a lot about temperatures. I wanted to let Eric go into a little bit about the types of temperatures he's using when he does press his sift. If he has a different grade of sift, does he use a different temperature, a higher temperature, a lower temperature for more? What does he do for better yields? You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
I briefly went over stuff earlier about how I make it. So I like to use the dry sift, and I'm pretty much like an Indian. I take my bud, we all hand trim it. We have trim bins we trim over, so we get to save what falls off. Nothing tries to be wasted. Then the buds do their thing, cure, go out into the world and my family. The trim, though, what's left over, that's the gold. That's what we use. I take that, then you put it in the freezer. Like he was talking earlier, it's got to be like fresh. The quicker the better. Put it in the freezer for like 2 hours after you're done. Let all the trimmers go home, pat them in the back, say, yeah, bye. Then you take that trim, put it in either the pollinator or on the trim bins, what I just did, and then you just shake the crap out of it. You end up with a whole bunch on the bottom, and it's gold. It's like powder. If you go to Mass Cannabis on Instagram, you'll see some of the pictures I've taken and the process that I do. Then from there, I take one of these bags, or I buy the screens themselves, the 220 micron screens, cut them up into tea bags. You can buy them, but it's easy enough to cut them up and throw it in there to the size that you have. I actually use a D-nail press, it's one of the first ones, but it's a big 15-inch plate because I use a lot of dry sift. So I don't have the high pressure that goes down on it, so I use a 220 for a temp at 15 seconds. And mine comes out gold or will auto butter, because I think, like what Addison was talking about, what I didn't know about, when you do those high pressure, it comes out brown. You're pushing the chlorophyll out. That needs to stay in there, it's nasty. It needs to fully dry it out, like till it's like crumbly. And then you can squish it and then it will come out gold. Like you see a lot of the rosins now is brown, and it's because, like he's talking about, it's chlorophyll, I guess. Chlorophyll gives you a headache. It gives me a headache. And yeah, then there's other techniques when it comes out and it's yellow like that. You can make it auto butter and look pretty just by putting it in your pocket for a day, you know, and then by the time you're done, it comes out and it looks beautiful, and you can brag to your friends about how cool it is. All right. Thank you.
All right, at this point in time in the panel, I'd like to start to take a couple questions from the crowd. If you'd like to take a question, please raise your hand. Come on up, bud.
You guys do any dry ice sift? Press?
Yeah, the dry ice sift. When I went to go do it, because I seen it on TV and all that jazz, everybody who asked at the labs and everything said too much contaminants come through. Addie will probably be able to explain a little more about it.
Well, I think what comes out of the dry ice, maybe for the first 3 seconds, it's okay. And after that, the thing is that not only the Christmas trees, but all the leaves. So they start coming through in really a short time.
Yeah, if you take cannabis that's prepared to be smoked, and like when I roll a joint, I'll take it apart and take as much leaf out as possible. If you do that process and mechanically separate what you're going to do the dry ice with, like little popcorn nugs, then you can get something really nice, but you're taking everything out. And then when you're using cold, you're making everything incredibly brittle. So you're separating it by using the brittleness. When you're using a press, you're using that continuity of all that heat to rush everything out. So it's sort of pressure, heat, cold. Those are all different ways. I think cold is best for extracting juice, because you keep certain cells and other things alive, where with cannabis, it's not, in extractions, it's not so important, plus you get so much particulate and other stuff that comes with it. I think, you know, the best way is probably getting dry sift and pressing that at the right temps. That, I mean, everyone wants to try something new and they want to be the guy that like says like, hey, I figured out fucking that one before everyone else did, and it's rad. But the one with cold is a little different than some of the other stuff. I mean, I would continue to experiment with it and see what you can get, but the yields typically are lower, and there's usually more particulate, and then you have to add another process to it to get it back down to where dry sift would be. So, you know, that's the other thing. And then,
Can I ask you,
Alright, yeah.
so you're talking about the contaminants in the dry ice. And after you dry ice, like shaking, you do, like you get first shake, second shake, third shake, and first shake's always the best, absolutely. But then you can take that and dry sift it. So is that going to remove the contaminants? Now, my question was then, is the dry ice causing problems? Whatever. Dark.
One thing about dry ice is it's very, very hard to get clean dry ice. He was mentioning the stuff that's in the dry ice. Yeah, it's gross. In my opinion, using dry ice for hash is completely bunk unless it's like really quick. I mean, I've seen dry ice hash that's bright yellow that won't press at all, and then you throw it in the press and you throw however much pressure on it, it comes out very, very dark and very low yield.
I mean, dry ice I think works best in a lab setting. Like if you blast and you're blasting and you have a chamber, it's the same idea. That chamber, they're using the cold in the chamber to get the waxes and fats to separate and get that stuff off. I mean, dry ice, I've seen guys take, you know, blasting into mason jars and then putting those jars into dry ice and then watching the separation occur in there. And you can take the darkest, nastiest oil and you can clean it that way and turn it to gold every time. It's phytol rich, beautiful. It's just open blasting and doing that method is pretty dangerous. It's something where you could blow yourself up or someone else up. And if you have a closed loop, it does it inside the chamber for you, so you really don't have to add that stuff to it. But the way I've seen dry ice, I wouldn't apply dry ice to any material that I was going to smoke, just because of the amount of contaminants and freon and other nasty shit. I mean, it's too easy. And I think the main thing that I try to promote in cannabis is that you can get everything out of cannabis 100% naturally that you can do non-naturally. Like if you've got a grow room and you have to use Eagle and all this shit, maybe your room's too small and the ventilation's not correct, and there's things that you can fix instead of going into that dark end of things and using all these chemicals. I mean, if you're using that stuff like too much neem or anything else, the concentrates are going to come out horrible anyway, because you've added all this shit to the mix that now has to be concentrated along with those other smaller compounds that you're trying to pull out. So it's just the natural way of doing it is the best way of doing all of it. You can have a small room. You know, when you set up a grow room, make sure you have incredible ventilation. That's one of the key things. So you can have a lot of heat from the lights and then still keep the plants cool enough and then keep the place clean and not use all these pesticides and not use this other stuff. Because at the end, you're going to have 100% organic cannabis, and as long as you dry it correctly, you can then do all this stuff that we're talking about and get that best product, you know? And you don't have to come up with it reinventing the wheel. You just do everything you're supposed to do right and do it with, you know, with cleanliness in mind and do it the right way. And then the product that you have in the end is better than, you know, what anybody has, because it came from you, you know where it came from, you know who created it. And then when you're done with it, give it to somebody if you can, and that's how you keep the cycle going. So that's kind of what I try to promote the most, is stay organic and natural. And then when you're done, give some extra shit away to somebody, especially someone who's sad. That usually helps out a lot. So.
By the way, if you want to know more or less what the quality is of the hash you're making, I always find if you can put some in a plastic bag and walk on it for 20 minutes and it turns out like a golden plaque, you got the right quality. If you need like 500 kg to get it to become one piece, anyway, it'll be black by then, yeah.
Like I said, know your grower. You know, I grow all mine, so I know where mine comes from. You know, and it's a great hobby as well. If you're gonna get into hash making and all that, you know, why not grow your own? You got your own plants to play with, your own strains, everything. If you need any pointers, there's enough stuff on the internet. You know, people to ask. So don't be afraid. You know, it's legal now.
All right, we definitely have time for one more question. We have 20 minutes of 420. Come on up, man.
Hey, how's it going, guys? You guys got a lot of experience making hash. I only have little experience. I wanted to know about these new methods of like freeze drying. Is it worth it spending, $5,000, or can I use like unconventional methods? Like I've used dry ice before just to get my patties really cold before microplaning, and that worked out well for me before. But obviously, I keep it from making direct contact with the actual dry ice. Yeah, I was wondering if you could share any knowledge of dry freezing hash.
Yeah, freeze drying seems to be the way to go with bubble. Is it worth the money? Do you have a market? Yeah, if you have a rat enough material, you get a freeze dry. It'll make it much better. It'll dry it much quicker. If you're in a drier environment, just like a clean room with that's very well ventilated. Where I'm at, there's no humidity, so it feels really weird right now with all this. But yeah, just as low a humidity as you can, as spread out as you can. I like to sieve, and I'll sieve it through just like a regular sifter and spread it out as much as I can. And if the material is rat enough, like you're talking about, don't use dry ice. Just throw it in the freezer until it's solid, and then shred it up with a cheese shredder. You're microplaning it. I don't like to microplane it because weird stuff happens in the freezer sometimes if you don't seal it properly. You could have a whole pull turn into sand, if you don't watch it, Just got to be real careful with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the other thing too is there's laboratories everywhere, and the way that whole business works is sometimes they're getting grants to prove a study, a proof of, purpose of a study or something like that. So laboratories, they'll spend a shitload of money, they build a giant laboratory, they prove what they're trying to prove, and then they sell everything off at auction. I've gotten cryo freezers for $400 just by following auctions and getting to the auction and bringing cash and being ready to buy it. There's laboratories like Raytheon, there's these big huge labs on the East Coast. You go all the way down the coast and they're everywhere, and you just search them out, you find these auctions, and you can buy cryo freezers for really cheap, and have a cryo freezer of your own. And we have taken columns, and you can pack material in columns and then stick them in cryo freezers. So you're pulling columns out that are coming fresh from the cryo and then running them right away, and then refreeze them, and then run them again. There's stuff that you can do if you have a cryo that fits your columns in it, and it's just, or you can go the whole next level. There's restaurants everywhere. There's restaurants going out of business. You can buy an entire walk-in fridge, and I have friends that own walk-in fridges, and they've converted and taken walk-in fridges and they turn them into labs where they're pressured out rooms where they can blast in and do all kinds of shit. And then you can open blast because you're in a fucking pressurized room. So you can find and build these laboratories that you need, sparkless fans and all these different things that you need to build a safe environment. But my point is it's not as expensive as you think to buy a cryo freezer. Like I said, I've got a nice one for $400. You can spend up to, Steepville has some that are $20,000 that are the size of this table that you can put bodies in, there's big ones. Or there's ones that are, the size of a good sized cooler, because they're portable lab ones that have to be in a lab. The bigger ones are better because they have their own generator and everything else inside of them. But you can get them, they're not that expensive, and they can make like you're saying, you're running, you want to do an experiment or do something else. Dry ice is a pain in the ass. You can also buy your own dry ice maker and make dry ice. As long as you're using good material and you've got the setup, you can make your own dry ice and then save some money that way. So, you can make all this shit yourself. You don't have to take the most expensive route either. So.
All right. I hope all you guys may have learned something from this half-hour discussion. I just want to say thanks to every single one of you up here for dedicating your time to come up here and speaking your mind. It takes a lot of heart to do that. We are all definitely experts at what we do. I love you all. Safe travels home. It's almost 420. Let's go see Method Red perform and enjoy the rest of this historical day. Much love. Salute.